Dimension Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So, multiverses are something that people have been discussing for a while when it comes to a lot of different franchises. So many different franchises have been incorporating multiverses into their stories to varying degrees of success. And with the topic of multiverses being something that's such a big deal, it's led a lot of Ninjago fans to wonder whether or not there is one when it comes to Ninjago. Now, according to Doc Wyatt, one of the head writers for Ninjago, there is no multiverse when it comes to Ninjago. This is an idea that he shot down pretty early on towards the beginning of Dragon's Rising when people were thinking that the merge was potentially some kind of multiverse related thing, but Doc Wyatt confirmed that it was not the case, and that again, there is no multiverse when it comes to Ninjago. Except, the thing is, there is technically a multiverse when it comes to the franchise. One does actually exist in the world of Ninjago, and in today's video, I'm going to go over Ninjago's technically canon multiverse. So, let's get into this whole thing. Now, when I bring up the idea of a multiverse when it comes to Ninjago, then I'm sure your mind probably goes to one of two places. Either A, the LEGO Ninjago movie, or B, the video game LEGO Dimensions, seeing as how in both those instances, Ninjago is connected to other universes. When it comes to the LEGO Ninjago movie, it's connected to the other LEGO movies, which themselves contain worlds based on various LEGO themes, and when it comes to the game LEGO Dimensions, it connects Ninjago to a variety of other dimensions and alternate universes. However, I am not referring to either of those things, because when it comes to the LEGO Ninjago movie and LEGO Dimensions, both of those things are actually in their own separate continuity that are completely separate from the Ninjago TV show and don't share any proper overlap with one another. Except for technically the movie with the designs being carried over into the show, but that's not really a proper crossover or connection between those two. No, instead, the thing that I'm referring to is actually the 5th graphic novel that was ever released for Ninjago all the way back during the earlier days of the show, with that being the graphic novel Kingdom of the Snakes. This graphic novel actually contains a canonical multiverse when it comes to Ninjago, and that's what I'm going to be looking at in today's video. Also, by the way, one other thing that I want to say before I get into the graphic novel, if you notice any brown marker that's on the pages that are in this graphic novel, I apologize for that. I bought this used off of Amazon, and those were in the graphic novel when I bought it. I'm not sure why those are there, but that's just the explanation behind the brown marker in here. But with that out of the way, let's get into this whole thing. So the story starts off with Jay flying the Stormfighter through a, storm. However, the storm ends up getting too rough for Jay, so he ends up making an emergency landing. However, shortly after he does this, he stumbles upon a location that he's never seen before. Constricti City, a place that is filled with Serpentine and Skulkin warriors. Jay is understandably really confused about what's going on, especially since he states how the Serpentine were defeated, so he tries to figure out what's going on, and he eventually runs into Baitar, one of the Constricti, as well as Kai, who for some reason is wearing an eye patch, and it's never actually explained why he's wearing an eye patch. It's really unclear. Either way, though, when it comes to Kai, he's acting pretty weird considering how he doesn't remember Jay, he doesn't even know who he is, and he's also acting as an enforcer for the Serpentine, with him and Baitar trying to track down Boneseye, one of the Skulkin warriors. Jay assumes that Kai is just going undercover, so he plays along. However, Jay quickly realizes that this isn't the case. Kai seriously doesn't know who he is, and he's not pretending to work alongside the Serpentine. He's actually doing it. So Jay ends up causing a distraction, and he runs away. He tries to figure out what's going on before eventually getting caught in a trap. One that was set by Cole, actually. And something pretty funny that I want to bring up here is that on the panel, you can clearly see that Jay and Cole are actually saying each other's lines here. That must have been a bit of a mix-up here, and again, I just think that's actually kind of funny, honestly. But either way, when it comes to Cole, he is really mad upon seeing Jay. But Jay isn't sure why Cole is mad at him. He has no idea what's going on. So Cole explains to him what's been going on, all while Jay tries to escape from the trap. And so, when it comes to Cole, he explains how Sensei Wu tried to form the ninja team in order to try and fight back against Garmadon and the Skulkin warriors, with Cole being the first one recruited and trained to be a ninja. However, when Sensei Wu went to go and recruit Jay, that didn't happen actually. Because when it came to Jay's flying device, the thing that he was working on prior to becoming a ninja, it actually worked. Jay's flying device was actually a success. He was able to make it work and he was able to fly. And so, as a result of that, Jay never actually became a ninja. And yeah, that's essentially the big thing that differentiates this world from the main Ninjago one. In this world, the original ninja team essentially never formed, all because Jay didn't really have a proper reason to join the ninja team. Not only that, but when Sensei Wu brought up the idea of recruiting Jay to be a member of the ninja team, Jay essentially shot down the idea because he thought the idea of Sensei Wu forming a ninja team in order to fight against Garmadon was ridiculous, so he decided not to go through with it. And that was actually enough to cause Wu to not form the ninja team. He decided not to go and look for Zane or Kai, meaning Cole was the only one who was actually ever trained to be a ninja. And so, as a result of that, Garmadon was able to successfully get the golden weapons, and he was able to take over Ninjago with the help of the Skullican warriors. However, things ended up taking a turn when Lloyd tried to prove himself to Garmadon in the only instance where Lloyd actually shows up during this graphic novel, and he thought that unleashing the Serpentine would be able to do that. However, that ended up backfiring on him, and instead the Serpentine and the Skullicans fought against one another. And the Serpentine ended up winning, all because they had help from the Great Serpent, aka the Great Devourer, who in this world I guess is perfectly fine with working alongside the Serpentine, whereas in the show the Great Devourer was just going to eat everything and everyone in Ninjago and seemingly didn't care about working alongside the Serpentine. Either way though, the Great Devourer and Garmadon fought against each other in a battle that, quote, almost wrecked the planet. However, Garmadon was ultimately defeated, and the Serpentine were able to take over Ninjago, with the Skullicans acting as their servants. So, yeah, things overall aren't looking that good when it comes to this world, because again, the Serpentine have taken over, the Skullicans are working for them, the ninja team never formed, and humans are seemingly prisoners in this world, because we see so very few of them throughout this world, and it's really unclear what exactly did happen to them in this world. But either way, yeah, things are definitely really bad when it comes to this world, all things considered. So anyway, Jay is eventually able to escape from the trap that he's in, and he gets to talking with Cole, explaining how things are in his world, stating how the ninja team did end up forming and how they were able to take down Garmadon and the Serpentine. And so the two of them try and come up with a plan on what to do next, with Jay suggesting that they go and find Zane, who Cole doesn't actually know. The two of them try to come up with a plan on what to do next, which involves finding the rest of the golden weapons. However, the Serpentine show up, so Jay and Cole have to fight against them. Also, something that I want to point out here is that Lasha, one of the Venomari, references Pythor and how he wants Cole to be brought to the Great Serpent. However, Pythor never actually shows up at any point during the graphic novel, which I will admit is kind of underwhelming. I think it would have been cool if Pythor did show up, but it's alright. And also, and this is the bigger thing here, the Serpentine are surprised upon seeing that Jay has the Nunchucks of Lightning. Because after Garmadon and the Great Devourers fight against one another, the Serpentine actually took the golden weapons for themselves. So the fact that Jay has one of them is definitely a big deal to the Serpentine. Jay eventually ends up getting knocked unconscious, and the Serpentine end up capturing Cole as well as the Nunchucks, but don't take Jay for whatever reason. We then cut to Garmadon, who's really confused about what's going on, primarily with Jay showing up and him fighting against the Serpentine. So he plans to go out in order to try and find Jay. We also learn that Garmadon is apparently keeping someone as a prisoner, although at this point it's unclear as to who that actually is, but we will find out, and the answer will shock you. So anyway, Jay eventually wakes up after being knocked unconscious, and Garmadon actually finds him, and the two of them end up forming an uneasy alliance in order to fight against the Serpentine. So after this, we then cut to a carnival, where as it turns out, Zane has been here the entire time. Zane has essentially turned himself into an attraction in order to avoid being captured by the Serpentine. And when it comes to Zane's attraction, he just sits in a tank of freezing cold water for a long amount of time, and that's about it. That's really all he does. However, once Jay and Garmadon show up, Zane ends up helping them out in a fight against the Serpentine, and with Garmadon being there, it actually inspires the Skullicans to turn against the Serpentine, giving the ninjas some new allies in their fight against them. After this, Jay, Zane, and Garmadon end up going to one of Garmadon's old bases in order to rescue Nia, because, as it turns out, Nia has still been a prisoner of the Skullicans this entire time. Remember, the entire reason why Kai went north to go and rescue Nia in the first place was because Wu tried to recruit him to be a ninja. However, in this world, since Wu never did that, Kai didn't go after Nia in order to try and rescue her. And instead, Kai has actually been working as an enforcer for the Serpentine this whole time in order to ensure Nia's safety, so that way nothing bad would happen to her. Which I do honestly think is something interesting to see, and I feel like it does honestly make a lot of sense that Kai would do that kind of thing, given how Nia does mean a lot to him, so it makes sense that when it comes to Kai, he'd want to do something in order to ensure her safety, especially since for a long time, they were the only family either of them knew. So again, this is something that I do honestly think is pretty interesting. So anyway, Jay ends up causing a distraction, taking out some of the Rattlecopters, while Garmadon and Zane sneak their way into Garmadon's base, where we learn that when it comes to Nia, she's essentially taken on the role that Dr. Julian did in the show, because with Nia being a blacksmith, the Serpentine essentially forced her to build all the vehicles for themselves and the Skullkins. And we also get this moment that, in an interesting way, almost sets up something that we saw during Season 4, specifically with the Elemental Masters building the Boulder Blaster to escape from Chen's Noodle Factory, because, as it turns out, Nia has actually been using the spare and scrap metal that she's been using to make the vehicles to build the Samurai X-Mech. So she uses that, and her, Garmadon, and Zane are able to make their way out of the base, and they reunite with Jay. The group then talks about what to do next, specifically with them talking about how Jay can potentially get back home, with Garmadon saying that when it came to the storm that brought Jay in, it's a really rare occurrence, and Zane brings up how they could potentially artificially recreate the storm. However, before Jay can actually go, he needs the Nunchucks of Lightning in order to bring them back to his world. And so, after this, the group then decides to split up, with Jay going to meet up with someone, while Nia, Zane, and Garmadon end up going to recruit Kai. We then cut back to the cave that Garmadon was in earlier, where we see that Garmadon's prisoner had escaped. And as it turns out, Garmadon's prisoner was Garmadon. Yeah, there's two Garmadons here. Or rather, this is actually the real Garmadon, and the Garmadon who's been with the ninja isn't the real one. So that raises the obvious question, who's the fake Garmadon? And once again, this answer will surprise you. After this, we then cut to a farm where Jay is supposed to meet with someone, and the person who Jay ends up meeting with is himself, actually. Jay actually runs into the alternate universe version of himself, the one who never became a ninja. And alternate universe Jay is understandably pretty confused upon seeing himself. However, once main Jay explains everything, alternate universe Jay is more understanding of what's going on. We also get this one moment that I think is pretty funny because it indirectly sets up the League of Jay from Season 12, with alternate universe Jay saying how the two of them should form a club, which I just think that's really funny. But when it comes to alternate universe Jay, he is still not for the idea of joining the ninja team and being a hero. Because, remember, in this world, Jay's flying device actually worked, and a lot of Jay's inventions were successful, actually. So, alternate universe Jay doesn't really see any reason behind joining the ninja team and being a hero, so main Jay basically ends up forcing him to be a hero and going along with him. We then cut to Zane, Garmadon, and Nia, who are busy getting Kai. When it comes to Zane, he acts as a distraction, luring Kai out of the woods, resulting in Nia being able to get him with the Samurai X-Mech, and upon seeing that Nia is fine, Kai is really happy about this. And we end up getting this nice moment where we see the two siblings being reunited with one another after being separated for such a long time. After this, the team talks about what they're going to do next, when suddenly Garmadon shows up. The real one is here. And so, now it's time to answer the question, who is the fake Garmadon? And as it turns out, the fake Garmadon was actually Sensei Wu. He was pretending to be Garmadon the entire time. And this is something that was actually set up throughout the events of the graphic novel. Because when it came to Garmadon, he acted and said things very similar to how Wu would. Stuff like telling the real Garmadon to drink tea, as well as talking the way like Wu does. And so again, that's something that I think is actually pretty cool. There was proper setup for this throughout the graphic novel. And when it comes to Wu, he says that the reason why he captured Garmadon and impersonated him is because he didn't want Garmadon to potentially ally himself with the Serpentine. And he also tells Garmadon that he needs to get the Skullkin army in order to fight against the Serpentine. Now, Garmadon isn't too thrilled at the idea of doing this, primarily because there aren't any Skullkins around at this point. However, Garmadon still agrees to do it because he also really doesn't like the Serpentine. So he plans to do it, and he says that after they defeat the Serpentine, then him and Wu will finally be able to settle things. And so after this, the ninja then plan for a full-blown assault on the Serpentine base. The assault ends up happening with the ninja, Wu, Nia, and Garmadon, as well as the Skullkin army, doing everything they can in order to fight back against the Serpentine, with the two J's showing up actually using alternate universe J's flying devices, which I do think is actually pretty cool. A massive fight ensues with the good guys doing everything they can in order to fight back against the Serpentine, while the two J's do what they can in order to deal with the Great Devourer. However, Main J ends up going into the cave where the Great Devourer was in order to get the golden weapons as well as rescue Cole. And once that happens, the rest of the ninja are able to get the golden weapons, thus turning the fight in the ninja's favor. Now, one thing that I want to point out here is something that's pretty confusing, and it's that throughout the graphic novel, the characters were confused whenever they saw that Jay had the Nunchucks of Lightning. Which makes sense because remember, the Serpentine took the golden weapons after Garmadon and the Great Devourer fought against one another, meaning that the Serpentine should have all 4 golden weapons. However, Jay introduced another golden weapon into this world by bringing the Nunchucks of Lightning from his world. Yet, for some reason, we only ever see one set of the Nunchucks of Lightning throughout the graphic novel, and we never see a second one. Even though there should be 2 sets of nunchucks. There was the one that Jay brought from his world, and the one that was already here. But again, for some reason, we only ever see the ones that Jay brought from his world, and not the ones that originated from this world. Which I will admit is pretty strange, honestly, and I'm not really sure why another set of nunchucks weren't included. And I feel like it would have made a lot of sense if both Jays ended up getting their own sets of nunchucks. Either way, though, the ninja have the golden weapons, and they do what they can in order to fight back against the Serpentine. The two J's end up doing what they can in order to fight back against the Great Devourer, and they're ultimately successful somehow. And it's never really made clear whether or not they were able to destroy the Great Devourer, or if they just defeated her. It's really unclear. Either way, though, the Serpentine and the Great Devourer were ultimately defeated, and Garmadon and the Skullkin Warriors ended up leaving, planning to return at some point to try and take over Ninjago. But with that, the day has been saved, and the bad guys have been defeated, and not only that, the ninja team has been formed in this world, which is a bit different in comparison to the one that we're all used to, but they're still ninja nevertheless, and they're still going to do whatever they can in order to fight back against bad guys and protect Ninjago. And Main J was actually able to inspire Alternate Universe J to be a hero, giving him an inspiration to do more. And I guess that when it comes to Alternate Universe J, he's gonna become a ninja, which I think would honestly be pretty cool. But then there's one last question that needs to be answered. How is J gonna get back to his world? And when it comes to that, Alternate Universe J just makes a device that's capable of artificially recreating the storm that Jay showed up in. Yeah, it's something that just happens really late into the graphic novel, and that's it. We don't actually see Alternate Universe Jay properly working on it. He just builds it, and Jay is able to use it to get home. Which, yeah, that did feel kind of rushed if I'm being honest. Although I do really like this one moment where Kai asks Alternate Universe J if the thing is safe, and Alternate Universe J says that it isn't, and Main J is able to use the artificial storm to return home, where he's ultimately reunited with the rest of the original 4 ninja, as well as Nia, and that's where the story comes to an end. And so, yeah, that is the alternate universe for Ninjago that we learn about in this graphic novel. One where the original ninja team never properly formed and the Serpentine were ultimately able to take over Ninjago. However, again, it's a world that was eventually saved by the arrival of Jay, who was actually able to inspire the ninja of this world to fight back and ultimately be heroes. Which I do think is actually something pretty interesting to see. But now it's time for me to answer something that I'm sure you're probably wondering about. What do I mean when I say that this is technically a canon multiverse when it comes to Ninjago? And I wouldn't blame you for being confused about this whole thing, because the whole thing when it comes to the canonicity of the graphic novels is something that can be kind of confusing. However, according to the people who worked on the show as well as the graphic novels actually can be canon to the show, so long as the graphic novels don't do anything that contradicts the main events of the show. And that is something that's happened a lot, the graphic novels contradicting stuff when it comes to the main show. I mean, that's a big thing that I brought up in my previous video talking about a Ninjago graphic novel when I discussed The One Who Is Many. But the thing is, as a result of things primarily taking place in an alternate universe, there really isn't anything that actually happens during this graphic novel that does contradict the main events of the show. Because this is a different world compared to the main show. It's an alternate universe. So there isn't really anything that can be contradicted. The only thing that you would really need to take a look at is Jay and see if there was anything with him that contradicted stuff in the main show. But once again, that doesn't really happen. Jay largely acts and talks the way he does in the main show. There isn't really anything where Jay says or does anything that's out of character. Everything that we see with him in the graphic novel does line up with the way he acts in the show. Now, with that being said, though, there are two things that I want to bring up that could potentially throw a wrench into the canonicity of this graphic novel. For one, Jay brings up on a few occasions how he and the other ninja were able to defeat the Serpentine, which raises the obvious question of when would this take place timeline-wise? Because we see that Jay still has the Nunchucks of Lightning with him, meaning that this would need to take place sometime before the final 2 episodes of Season 1 of Ninjago. And the thing is, though, I feel like that's something that could actually end up working. I feel like it's entirely possible that when it comes to this story, it could take place sometime shortly after the events of the episode All of Nothing, given how at the end of that episode, the ninja were able to get all 4 of the Fang Blades and they were getting ready to destroy them, meaning that from the perspective of the ninja, the Serpentine were essentially defeated. So timeline-wise, again, I feel like this would most likely take place sometime after the episode All of Nothing and prior to the final 2 episodes of Season 1. However, the other big thing that needs to be brought up is something that we actually see Jay doing a few times throughout the events of this graphic novel, and that's using Spinjitzu to fly. This is something that happens a few times when it comes to the graphic novel. Spinjitzu essentially acting like air jitsu, where the ninja just have the ability to fly, which is something obviously the ninja can't use Spinjitzu for Ninjago, except for Kai and Nia during Season 1, Episode 5 of Dragon's Rising, when for some reason they can use Spinjitzu like air jitsu. Like, yeah, that's something that actually happened and it's never really explained why. However, when it comes to this graphic novel, I feel like you could make the argument that Jay isn't really using his Spinjitzu to fly, but instead he's using it to glide through the air. Something which we have seen the ninja do a few times using their Spinjitzu throughout the events of the show. I know that when it comes to both these things, they aren't super airtight, but still, I feel like both these could be solid explanations in order to have this still fit into the canonicity of the show. And again, given what's actually been said about the canonicity of the graphic novels, then on a technicality, when you look at it, this is a story that is technically canon when it comes to Ninjago, meaning that, again, technically, Ninjago does have a canonical multiverse that actually exists in it. One that I highly, highly doubt we're ever going to see again, ever, considering how, again, Doc Wyatt basically shot down the idea of there being any kind of multiverse thing related to Ninjago. Given how, again, Doc Wyatt did basically shut down the idea of any kind of multiverse related thing when it comes to Ninjago in regards to Dragon's Rising. Not to mention, Doc Wyatt has made it clear that he isn't a fan of multiverses, so again, I doubt we're ever going to see this thing be brought up again at some point, but still it is something that I do find to be interesting. Again, the technically canon multiverse when it comes to Ninjago, even though, again, we're probably never going to see it again at some point. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys, so tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me what are your guys' thoughts on this alternate universe when it comes to Ninjago, and what do you think about it? Again, tell me down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys. This is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.